A struggling single dad and his daughter unexpectedly welcome a traumatized homeless boy, leading to a journey of healing, love, and second chances. As their bonds deepen, a woman from the boy's past returns, transforming their lives forever. If you're like this story, please subscribe our channel Heartfelt Tales, because kindness, love, and second chances matter and keep us going. Let us begin. The rain came soft and steady, a gray hush falling over the tired town, like a wool blanket pulled over aching shoulders. Streetlights hummed dimly through the mist, painting halos in the puddles. Outside the grocery store, the dumpster leaked a rusted drip. Beneath it, crouched in the shadow of cardboard and fear, was a boy. Daniel didn't see him at first. He'd pulled his coat tighter, the collar wet and curling, his boots heavy with mud as he stepped out from the store, brown paper bag tucked under one arm, day-old bread, some Dennikin soup, a half carton of milk. Just enough. Just barely. Same as always. He almost passed the alley. But Sophie's mittened hand tugged his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing. The boy flinched as if her voice had struck him. Daniel squinted through the rain. A small, trembling figure, knees pulled his chest, face hidden in the crook of thin arms. Soaked, still, breathing like a ghost. They stood in the downpour, Daniel and his daughter, staring at a moment they couldn't yet name. "Hey there," Daniel said gently. His voice cracked a little, like it hadn't been used for kindness in a while. "You all right, buddy?" No answer, just the sound of water on concrete. Sophie let go of Daniel's hand and stepped forward. The boy's eyes flickered up, wide and unsure, dark and watching. She knelt beside him, pulled something from her pocket, a small pink eraser shaped like a bunny. She held it out. The boy didn't take it, but he looked at it. That was enough. Daniel crouched slowly, the paper bag pressed against his chest. "We've got soup," he said, "and heat, just a few blocks that way. You can warm up. No one's going to ask questions." Still no answer, but the boy didn't run. And when Daniel gently extended a hand, the boy stared at it for a long time before finally, wordlessly, taking it. They walked the 3 blocks home in silence. Daniel carried the bag. Sophie held the boy's other hand. The rain followed them all the way. Their home was a whisper of a house, weathered siding, windows that breathed fog. Inside, the heat clicked alive with a groan. A fire stirred in the hearth, low and crackling, fed by leftover wood from the shed. It was enough. Daniel handed the boy a towel. He didn't ask his name. Not yet. Sophie showed him where to leave his shoes, how to tuck them neatly by the door. She gave him one of her dry sweaters, purple, with a frayed unicorn stitched into the front. He was small for 7, or maybe just shrinking from inside. They didn't talk much that night. Daniel heated soup. Sophie wrapped herself and the boy in a quilt on the couch. Cartoons flickered on the old TV. Muted, the boy watched the screen, but his eyes stayed distant, like they were seeing a different room, a different day. Daniel noticed how he flinched at sharp sounds, how he didn't meet anyone's gaze for long, how he clutched the sweater's hem, like a lifeline. Trauma didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered from the corners of a child's silence. Later, after Sophie was asleep, tangled in blankets and moonlight, Daniel sat on the edge of the worn armchair, watching the boy, still awake, still curled tight, like he feared waking up meant being taken again. "Place is yours tonight," Daniel murmured. "No one's going to move you." The boy blinked slowly, but didn't speak. His eyes were rimmed red. He'd stopped shivering, but not breathing like someone lost. Daniel rubbed his hands together. They were rough hands, mechanics' hands, scarred and calloused. Not the kind that made children feel safe, he used to think. But Sophie had never complained. Now here was another little one, silent and shaken. Another child under his roof. A stranger. A shadow. Daniel looked down. There was an old photo on the mantel. His wife, smiling in the sun, hair like light, Sophie in her arms. He hadn't moved it since the funeral. He stood and placed a folded blanket over the boy. "You're not alone," he said softly. And though he expected silence, a small, broken voice replied, "I don't want to go back." Daniel turned. The boy was staring at the fire, not him. His voice was paper thin. Noted, Daniel said gently. Then you don't have to. Not tonight. The boy nodded once, then curled deeper into the couch. The next morning came in blue light. Frost on the window panes, the hum of the old heater trying its best. Daniel made oatmeal. Sophie poured too much sugar into hers and tried to sneak spoonfuls into the boy's bowl. He let her. After breakfast, Daniel walked him to the school office. He used a false name on the temporary forms. They didn't ask many questions, too many kids, not enough staff. He said he was a relative. That seemed enough. Later, at home, Daniel stared at the couch where the boy had slept. Sophie had placed a pink bunny eraser on the armrest, like a totem. He picked it up and turned it over in his hand. It was still warm. That night, a storm rolled in harder. Thunder cracked low in the distance. Sophie had gone to bed. Daniel stood at the window, watching trees sway like nervous dancers. The boy sat at the table with a broken pencil and a page from an old coloring book. Daniel crossed the room. He knelt beside him. Need help sharpening that? The boy hesitated, then nodded. Daniel retrieved a sharpener from the drawer. As he turned the pencil inside it, the boy watched him closely. Curious now, less wary. I'm Daniel, he said. The boy didn't reply. You got a name? A long pause. Then quietly, Ethan. Daniel smiled. Ethan's a strong name. Ethan looked down at the paper. He began to color. A few days passed. Each one stitched a new thread into the quiet fabric of their routine. Ethan began to smile in small bursts, especially when Sophie told her nonsensical jokes. He started eating more, slept longer. Still no talk of where he came from, or who he belonged to. Daniel didn't press. Some questions needed to wait until a child felt safe inside their own skin. But one afternoon, as the snow began to fall soft outside the window, Ethan drew a picture. It was a house. Not this one, bigger, with tall windows. A woman stood in front of it, her hair long and golden. She was holding something, a teddy bear. Ethan folded the paper and handed it to Sophie. She opened it, studied it with quiet wonder, and then gave it to Daniel. He read the unspoken memory in the crayon lines. She was pretty, Daniel said gently, handing it back. Was that your mom? Ethan's eyes welled. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, after the fire burned down to glowing coals, Ethan stood in the doorway of Daniel's room. Daniel stirred, turned on the lamp. Hey, bud. Ethan stepped in, holding his pillow. Can I stay? He whispered. Daniel made space beside him in the bed, lifting the blanket. Ethan climbed in and curled toward him, small and trembling. Daniel rested a hand on his shoulder. You're safe, he said. Ethan closed his eyes. Moments later, in a voice so soft it could have been the wind itself, he said one word. Dad. Daniel didn't speak. Couldn't. His throat was tight. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding under the weight of that word. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt like the truest thing he'd heard in years. It began with snowflakes and a missing scarf. Ethan stood on the porch, breath curling like smoke, watching Sophie run circles in the yard. Her red scarf flew behind her, trailing like a comet. The wind took it without warning, flinging it into the white lace bushes beyond the fence. She stopped, looked back at Ethan. He didn't hesitate. He ran, small boots crunching, heart thudding in a rhythm he hadn't known he remembered. His fingers closed around the scarf, caught on a branch. He turned, and Sophie was there, arms open, smiling. That was the first time he let her hug him. Inside, Daniel watched from the kitchen window, a hand resting lightly on the sink edge. He didn't speak, just breathed. The fire crackled in the living room behind him. Soup simmered on the stove. He bought Ethan a new winter coat the day before, navy blue, second-hand but warm. It still had someone else's name stitched inside, Lucas. Ethan hadn't seemed to mind. That night, as snow tapped soft against the windows, Daniel found Ethan kneeling beside the fireplace. He wasn't playing, just staring into the flames, as if they were telling him stories only he could hear. Daniel sat beside him on the floor. You light the fire? He asked. Ethan nodded. It's quiet, he said after a moment. It doesn't ask questions. Daniel smiled softly. Neither do I. But if you ever want to tell me anything, I'll listen. Ethan didn't answer, but he didn't move away either. A week passed like candlelight, flickering, warm, tender. The house grew fuller in spirit, not space. Sophie insisted Ethan take one of her favorite books to school, The Invisible String. She said it would help him when he missed someone. Ethan carried it in his backpack, the edges frayed by lunchtime. He didn't read it out loud, just traced the pictures with his fingers. That night, Daniel found the book beneath Ethan's pillow. A string of red yarn tied around it. Handmade. I added it. Ethan said, not quite meeting his gaze. So I don't forget the string is there. Daniel nodded, voice low. Good idea, bud. In the evenings, Daniel fixed cars in the cold garage, the heater barely humming. Ethan sometimes sat on a crate nearby, watching. He didn't speak much, but he handed tools without asking. His small fingers learned the feel of each one. Once, Daniel handed him a bolt too heavy for his hands. Ethan held it anyway, jaw tight, stubborn. Then it fell, clanged to the floor. He froze. Daniel crouched beside him, gently lifting the bolt. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said quietly. Ethan's lip trembled, but he nodded. That was enough. One morning, a letter arrived. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a flyer, missing child. Ethan's face younger, smiling. Daniel held in the quiet kitchen, the ticking clock suddenly too loud. Ethan was outside with Sophie, building something in the snow. A crooked snowman with a stick for a nose. He folded the flyer and tucked it into the junk drawer, beneath old batteries, broken rubber bands. He sat with it for a long time. It was Sophie who broke the silence that night. Was Ethan lost? She asked, curled under his arm on the couch. Daniel hesitated. I think. He still is, he whispered, but not in the way you think. She nodded, her head against his chest. I'll help him find his way back. Daniel kissed her forehead. I know you will. Ethan started calling Sophie soft. She pretended not to notice, but her grin said otherwise. They made a ritual of bedtime stories. Daniel read aloud while both kids curled beside him, half listening, half dreaming. One night, Ethan brought out a worn photograph, creased and sun-faded. A woman, smiling, hair like wheat, eyes like his. He placed it in Daniel's lap without a word. Daniel touched the edge. She's beautiful. Ethan nodded. She smells like oranges, he said softly. Daniel folded the picture back and handed it to him. That's a good thing to remember. Some memories came in pieces. A song on the radio. The smell of lavender soap. A chipped teacup in the cabinet Ethan refused to use, though he never said why. One afternoon, Daniel found him sitting in Sophie's closet, lights off, holding one of her stuffed bears. Sometimes I pretend I'm not me, Ethan said. Daniel sat cross-legged at the doorway. That's okay. Sometimes I do that too. Ethan looked up. Do you pretend you still have a wife? Daniel's breath caught, but he answered honestly. Sometimes, yeah. They sat there a long while, in the soft dark, just two people with holes in their hearts, learning to breathe around them. Spring tiptoed in slowly. The snow melted from the roof in quiet drips. Daffodils began to push from the earth like hopeful thoughts. Daniel bought new seeds for the garden, nothing fancy, just things that might survive rough soil. He handed Sophie and Ethan their own pots to plant something small. Ethan chose marigolds. They don't die easy, he said. Daniel smiled. Neither do we. That night, after stories, after Sophie had fallen asleep mid-sentence, Ethan stood in the doorway again. Do you think she's looking for me? He asked. Daniel sat up. Your mom? Ethan nodded, eyes wide. I think if she's anything like you, she never stopped. Ethan crept onto the bed. He didn't lie down right away, just leaned into Daniel's side. If she finds me, do I have to go? Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. Steady. You'll never be made to go where you don't feel safe, he said. That's a promise. Ethan leaned his head against Daniel's arm. Quiet. Then, like a breath, I feel safe here. In the kitchen drawer, the flyer waited. But Daniel didn't touch it. Not yet. Some wounds were still closing. And in the stillness of that night, rain soft on the roof, firelight painting gentle shadows, Daniel felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. It started with a knock, not loud, not rushed, just a hesitant thud against the wood. Rain had been falling all morning, soft as lullabies, the kind of rain that made windows blur and hearts turn inward. Daniel was wiping down the counters when he heard it. He opened the door slowly. She stood there, soaked to the bone, hair flattened by the rain, fingers white from clenching. She didn't speak right away, just held out a photograph. A little boy, Ethan, smiling, arms thrown around a man whose face had been partially torn away. Whether by time or grief, he couldn't tell. "I'm looking for my son," she whispered. Daniel didn't move. He watched her face as recognition twisted behind her eyes, like a thread pulling tight. "Where is he?" she asked, voice breaking in the middle. He could have lied. He could have said, "You've got the wrong house." But something in her eyes, the same ache he saw in the mirror some mornings. He stepped aside. "He's safe," Daniel said quietly. "And he's loved." Ethan didn't recognize her at first. She entered the living room like a ghost, unsure where she belonged. Sophie sat at the table, coloring. Ethan knelt beside her, crayons scattered like bright confetti. When he turned, the moment cracked. His hand froze above the paper. Eyes met. He didn't speak. Neither did she. She took a step forward. Then another. "It's me," she said, voice shaking. "It's Mama." Ethan stepped back. Daniel started to move, but Sophie beat him to it. She stood between them, her small arms stretched like a shield. "He's scared," she whispered to the woman. "Go slow." The house held its breath for the rest of the day. The woman, her name was Lila, sat on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't ask to come in again. She watched the rain, let it soak her coat. Daniel brought her tea. She held it, but didn't drink. Inside, Ethan wouldn't leave Sophie's room. He sat in the corner, holding her doll. "She left," he whispered. "She left me in the dark." Sophie didn't try to correct him. She handed him her flashlight instead. "So if it gets dark again," she said, "you can still see?" Daniel and Lila spoke that night in hushed tones by the kitchen sink, the children asleep upstairs. "I lost him," she said, voice barely above the rain outside. "It was a traffic jam. 1 minute he was there, the next he was gone. I searched every shelter, every street." Her hands trembled. "My husband had just passed. I wasn't whole. I was running on fumes and panic, and I failed him." Daniel didn't offer platitudes. He just poured another cup of tea. "You didn't stop looking," he said. "That matters." She looked at him then, really looked, as if seeing something soft she'd forgotten existed. "You have kind eyes," she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded once. Over the next few days, she didn't push. She stayed in town, a small motel on the edge of the valley, came by in the mornings, sat outside as Ethan played with Sophie from a distance. She brought books he once loved, a toy truck worn with use, his baby blanket, still faintly scented with oranges. Ethan never reached for any of it until the 5th morning. He walked up to her, silent as a sunrise, sat beside her on the porch step. "Do you remember the lullaby?" he asked. Her breath caught. "I do." "Then sing it." Her voice cracked on the first note, but she sang, softly, slowly, the same lullaby she had once hummed beside a crib in a room now long packed away. He leaned against her shoulder. That night, Daniel found Sophie in the living room, quietly crying. "She's gonna take him," she whispered, "and he won't be my brother anymore." Daniel sat beside her. "Families don't disappear," he said gently. "They just stretch." She wiped her nose. "Will I still be a sister?" Daniel kissed the top of her head. "Always." Lila started joining them for dinners. Small things, helping with dishes, picking Ethan up from school. He didn't call her Mom. Not yet. But one evening, she put a note in his lunchbox. It read, I miss you every minute we're not together. I'm proud of who you're becoming. Love, always. He didn't say a word about it. But Daniel noticed the corner of the note peeking from Ethan's pocket, carried all day like a shield. It was a Wednesday when the walls finally broke. They were all sitting around the fireplace. Sophie asleep across Daniel's lap, Lila on the rug, legs curled beneath her. Ethan stared into the fire, as he always did when words were too heavy. Then he whispered, "Do you still love me?" Lila didn't hesitate. More than anything. He looked at Daniel. "What if I go with her?" Daniel swallowed. "Then I'll miss you like the sun misses the stars during the day. But I'll be happy knowing you're home." Silence. Then Ethan said, voice cracking, "Can I have two homes?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, buddy, you already do." Later that night, Daniel stood in the driveway, watching the stars appear one by one. Lila stepped beside him. Neither spoke for a long while. Then she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out an envelope. "I have more than I'll ever need," she said. "And I see how you live, how you give." He didn't look at the envelope. "I'm not for sale," he said quietly. She nodded. "I know. This isn't for you. It's for the home you built, for them, so you can breathe a little easier." She placed it on the porch rail and walked back inside. Daniel didn't open it that night. Instead, he sat by the fire, both children sleeping nearby. Lila tucked into the armchair across the room, her hand curled around the edge of the baby blanket. There was no ceremony, no grand decorations, just the steady sound of rain on the windows, and three people slowly stitching their broken pieces into something whole. There was still snow on the windowsill that morning, though spring had quietly slipped its fingers into the thawing earth. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Shadows danced along the wooden beams of the small living room. Daniel stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee with slow hands. He wasn't in a hurry anymore. The world had softened its grip on his chest. From the hallway came a soft thump, then a laugh. "Ethan." A lighter sound followed. Sophie's voice. She was saying something about building a fort before breakfast. And then, just briefly, a third voice joined them. Warmer. Familiar now. Lila. On the wall near the table, a photograph had been added. Not new, but recent. Sophie and Ethan curled into the same quilt. Both asleep, the corners of their mouths turned just slightly upward. Daniel had taken it, without them knowing. He'd looked at it more times than he could count. Not because of how it looked, but because of what it meant. They no longer worried about definitions. No custody agreements had been drawn yet. No declarations made. But still, every morning Lila came over. Some evenings she stayed. She folded laundry, read books aloud, brought Ethan's favorite soup from that little diner across town. And when Daniel ran his fingers through his daughter's hair, brushing it into gentle braids, Lila would watch with a softness in her chest she didn't try to name anymore. Love had come quietly into the house, not as a guest, but like something that had always lived there, waiting to be seen. One Sunday morning, Ethan asked for pancakes. He'd never asked for anything before, not with certainty, not with that clear-eyed boldness children have when they feel safe. Daniel had blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Pancakes it is." He made them slowly, letting Sophie help measure the flour, while Lila stirred the batter with a wooden spoon Ethan now called the magic wand. The kitchen filled with cinnamon, warm and thick. They ate at the table together. No one rushed. There was no rush anymore. Later that day, Sophie brought down an old cardboard box from the attic. "It's Mommy's," she said, eyes wide. Daniel hesitated. He hadn't touched the box in 3 years. She opened it herself. Inside, a faded scarf, a pressed daisy and a book, a handwritten letter never mailed, and a small jar of beach sand from the trip they never got to take. Sophie touched the sand with reverence. "We should share it." So they did. A small glass bowl in the center of the living room now held that sand. A memory shared, not stored away. Daniel found Lila by the back porch later, sitting alone with a quietness around her like fog. He joined her, said nothing. After a long pause, she spoke. "Do you ever stop missing him?" she asked. He didn't lie. No. Lila nodded. But, he said, you start to carry it better. Some days, it even feels like they're walking alongside you, just far enough to not be seen. She turned to look at him. I think he's starting to remember me. Not just the pain, but the love, too. He is, Daniel said, and he meant it. Spring arrived in full. The trees outside their home budded in green, and the children began spending more time in the yard. They built nests out of blankets and held tea parties with juice boxes and dry cereal. One afternoon, Ethan brought Daniel a picture he'd drawn for stick figures. A house, a sun with a smile. What's this? Daniel asked. Our family, Ethan said shyly. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. You remembered to draw the dog, he said, pointing. Ethan grinned. We don't have one. Maybe someday. Can we name him Peanut? Daniel chuckled. Only if Sophie agrees. That evening, as twilight settled into the valley, they had dinner outside. Candles flickered in jars. Lila made roast chicken. Daniel brought sweet corn, and Sophie insisted on setting the table with mismatched napkins from a thrift shop box. It wasn't polished. Nothing matched, but it was perfect. Halfway through the meal, Lila reached for Daniel's hand beneath the table. Just once. He didn't pull away. Ethan and Sophie were laughing at something only they understood. A joke made of inside giggles and nonsense words. And for the first time in years, Daniel let himself lean into the moment without the ache of the past pressing too hard on his ribs. Some weeks later, Lila brought over something wrapped in cloth. This was Ethan's favorite when he was little, she said, opening the bundle. A music box. Old. Wooden. Hand-painted stars across the lid. He used to ask me to play it every night. She wound it. It creaked slightly, then released a tune, soft and tinkling, like a lullaby whispered through time. Ethan came to stand beside her. That song, he whispered. Lila looked at him. I never forgot it, she said. He leaned in, resting his head on her shoulder. And just like that, the distance fell away. On a quiet Thursday, Daniel took a deep breath and began something new. He cleared a space in the garage, dusted off his tools, started repairing old furniture. Nothing big, just small tables and chairs from neighbors. Word spread. Orders came. He hadn't planned on it, but it felt right. Each piece he worked on felt like stitching something back together, not just wood, but part of himself. One afternoon, Lila brought him lemonade. Thinking of calling it Second Chances Carpentry, he joked. She smiled. I think that's exactly what it is. The kids asked for a picnic in the hills one warm morning. They packed sandwiches and juice, cookies in a tin. Lila brought an old quilt. Daniel carried the thermos of coffee. Up on the hilltop, they spread the blanket and watched clouds roll like slow waves across the sky. At some point, Ethan fell asleep, head on Sophie's lap. She was humming something, maybe the tune from the music box. Daniel and Lila sat side by side, shoulders touching. He pulled something from his pocket, a tiny polished piece of driftwood carved into the shape of a heart. From that broken chair leg, he said. She took it gently. Everything broken can become something beautiful, she whispered. There was no grand proposal, no rings, just a conversation one evening while folding laundry. What would you think, Daniel asked, if we did this forever? Lila folded a shirt slowly. I think I already am. They didn't move houses. They didn't need to. Instead, they made space. A new dresser in Sophie's room with extra drawers for Ethan. A second toothbrush beside Daniel's. More shoes by the door. And love. Quiet, steady, ever-present. Unfolded across the floors and walls like sunlight through sheer curtains. The night before school began, they had a small ritual. A circle of candles. Each person made a wish, softly, without saying it aloud. Ethan's eyes were closed the longest. When he opened them, he smiled, not wide, not big, but like someone who'd finally found the ground beneath his feet. The seasons changed again. Leaves turned amber. Mornings chilled. Daniel found a note one day inside his coat pocket. It was Ethan's handwriting. Thank you for being my second dad. I love you more than pancakes. Daniel kept that note in his wallet. Still does. And so they lived. Not perfectly, but gently, with room for mistakes, for hugs, for starting over. Ethan never stopped missing the version of his life that had vanished. Neither did Lila. Daniel still dreamed of his wife sometimes, her laughter echoing through empty hallways of memory. But none of them were alone anymore. They had built something together, not out of ease, but out of choice. A family reimagined. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.